Welcome back to This is VANCOLOUR. Now, I'm really lucky because I get paid to give out my opinion, but can your employer limit your right to express your opinion? To discuss is a labor and human rights lawyer recently featured on Vancouver Magazine's Power 50 list as one of the city's most powerful people, the president of the BC Civil Liberties Association, Hasan Alam. Hello, Hasan. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you for having me, Mo.
Okay, so let's just start at the basics. I know people say freedom of speech, but we don't actually have that here in Canada, right? We have freedom of expression. Can you explain what our freedom is in this regard?
Sure. So under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Section 2, we have a broad protection around our ability to express our opinions, our beliefs, our convictions, and those are protected under the Charter. And specifically, it prevents the government from interfering with that right. Now, that extends to all spheres of our lives, including when we're out in public, even within the workplace. However, within the workplace, there are certain restrictions that apply.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the general restrictions to freedom of expression, because obviously things like hate speech or slander, like
100%.
There are some limitations. So what are the general limitations to freedom of expression?
Yeah, it's not a free-for-all for us. So
I can't say whatever I want.
You can't say whatever you want. No. So definitely hate speech. So you can't go around, promoting hatred for a specific category of people. You cannot be going around, for example, promoting child pornography. You can't be going around spreading, secret evidence that is considered secret evidence under the Public Safety Act. You also cannot be going around harassing and threatening people. Those are the limitations.
Can I yell fire in a crowded hall?
If that leads to a riot, then no, you should not be yelling it, right? Because the main point is your freedom of expression. The boundaries of it are when you start impeding someone else's safety, right? Those are the general boundaries. Now, safety being their physical, their mental well-being, right? Those are the boundaries of our freedom of expression rights.
This makes sense. Now, let's talk about it in an employment sense. So, obviously, if you're an employee for a company, I can see why an employer would say, hey, you know what? We don't want you to be too political, or we don't want you to do or to say certain things, especially if you're in a customer-facing role. So break this down for me in very broad strokes. What limitations can an employer impose on an employee when it comes to freedom of expression?
Really important question, because I think people assume that they have a lot of rights when it comes to the workplace in terms of their freedom of expression. They actually have very, very limited rights.
Okay.
And specifically when it comes to non-unionized employees, employers can pretty much limit anything that you say in the workplace.
Including in your private life, like on social media?
We can talk about private life, but in terms of the workplace, an employer can fire you without cause and not even cite the fact that they're firing you because of what you said in the workplace and just pay you out for the notice periods that are required under the Employment Standards Act. Now, outside of the workplace, of course, you have more you're given more broad scope in terms of what you can say. However, the test is if you say something in the public sphere which impacts the reputation of the employer or impacts one of your coworkers, well, then the employer can also discipline you or fire you. We see this all the time where you'll have a WhatsApp group filled with, employees talking badly about a coworker, and that gets into the employer's hands, and then they fire those people.
See that, and that sounds like it could be harassment. But I guess what I'm saying is, if you're an employee and you post a hot take on politics on your Twitter or social media, can an employer say, "Hey, you know what? You actually work for us. We don't want you to make that opinion online"?
Well, it's a really good question, Mo, and there's no clear answer. I'm speaking like a lawyer here, right? But in this heightened political climate, there are certain political stances that you can take, which the employer could subjectively say, hey, that is disrupting our operations or that is impacting our workplace.
Like
right?
What examples would that be?
Well, Amy Blanding is a recent case that we saw, right? She was the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Northern Health. She was performing at a concert and wore a watermelon t-shirt and then went online and posted in support of Palestine, right? The employer received some angry letters from the public, and they asked her to step down from her position. And she took that as constructive dismissal and resigned and filed a suit about that. So again, she wore a watermelon t-shirt, right? The employer took that as being political speech and disrupting the workplace. So I think the point is that it really depends on—
So is that legal though? Like, how did that case turn out?
Well, we'll see how that case goes.
It's still happening.
And it's an important case because very few individuals actually file these sort of cases. So I think the point is it depends on the political atmosphere, right? Like, is it a charged issue? Had she spoken about Ukraine, would the employer have taken a similar approach to her political speech? So it's a very subjective thing depending on your employer.
And to be clear, in this specific case, this person went to a concert on their own time. They weren't representing the company.
No, they weren't.
Were just wearing a t-shirt.
They were performing, and they didn't even wear the t-shirt on stage during the performance. It was a picture of them backstage wearing the t-shirt, which got into the employer's hands, right? So again, the point is, you aren't as guarded as you think you are, right? And as a union side labor lawyer, I have to say one of the best protections you have as a worker is to unionize your workplace, because then the employer has to fire you for just cause.
But this seems like it would also be open to a lot of misinterpretation, right? Someone thinks you made let's just say you wanted to express that you were sending your heart out to an audience,
100%.
but they see it as a certain salute, right? Like
100%.
And it just seems like you can misinterpret or argue about what it was.
100%. It could be, and the test is a very subjective one, where the judge or the court or the tribunal will be weighing, okay, this person's freedom of expression rights versus a business interest and reputation or operational needs of the employer, right? And as the head of the BC Civil Liberties Association, I hope that we as a society put more weight on people's political speech rights than we do on business interests.
This just sounds like fertile ground for lots of billable hours from lawyers.
It is, but that's an excellent point, Mo. That's an excellent point, because this is an access to justice issue too, right?
Right.
Which private sector employee can afford to take on the legal bill of fighting their employer when they fire them? Very few, right? You're going to take the severance package rather than filing the lawsuit, which could cost you upwards of $50,000, right?
Wow.
So again, how protected is our freedom of speech when access to justice is such a limited thing?
It just feels like it's a simple concept, but then when you really start digging into it, it's a lot more complicated in practice. Is that fair?
It's a lot more complicated in practice, and also I think we think that we have more rights than we do, right? When it comes to freedom of expression, we look at the charter, we think, yeah, that's what I'm entitled to, but that's not what you're entitled to in the employment context.
Yeah, fair enough. Hasan, I appreciate your time. This was so illuminating, although I will have to think about this a little more. So thanks so much.
I'm glad I gave you something to think about. Good having
Absolutely.
you. Yeah.
Folks, that was the president of the BC Civil Liberties Association, Hasan Alam. Now, after some business, this thing started in Nanaimo. So yeah, let's talk about Elon Musk up next.